Okay, good afternoon. I hope we've had everyone who's coming. Will you come in, please? We're beginning the afternoon session. We've got a wonderful group of speakers and very interesting. I'm Kathleen Madrowski. I'm Dean of the Jindal School of Liberal Arts and Humanities. What we're going to do this after, we're changing a little bit our perspective now. We'd spoken this morning, our speakers had spoken about traditional media, more or less traditional media. What we're going to talk about is new media and the direction that will take in a more people-to-people encounter. Some of our speakers will go more into detail about the tremendous potential of youth communication. The fact that who's using the new media, what the purposes are, what the representation is, and if we see signs of change coming in. So I'm going to have our first speaker will be Sukumar Muralidharan, and he is a well-known writer, researcher, and he has been at the Shimla Institute, the Advanced Studies, Indian Institute of Advanced Studies in Shimla. He's also been teaching at Jamia Millia Islamia University, and he has been a guest professor, a speaker, and well known as an independent writer and journalist. His topic's going to cover issues of the new media, what it brings in and what it excludes, and the uses of elements such as artificial intelligence and electronic search engines. Does that thoroughly, does that make the news more opaque, or does it add a human element to it?
Thank you. Thank you so much. Let me just begin with stating one of the interesting features of the legal foundations of media freedom in India. The media in India enjoys no specific constitutional protection, unlike in the US, where there's a First Amendment which specifically mentions freedom of the press as something that cannot be infringed by any enactment. The media in India enjoys no specific constitutional protection, but derives its rights from Article 19 of the Constitution, which is a general right of free speech, that it is a broadly held right of all citizens. So media rights are like citizens' rights. Among the grounds for exceptions to the right to free speech, which was introduced by the first constitutional amendment, is friendly relations with foreign states. Now, this is a unique constitutional provision, which I believe doesn't exist anywhere else in the world, and it has its origin in the immediate aftermath of partition. There is a specific historical background to it, but there is little by way of developed jurisprudence, which is both good and bad, as I will argue. In the bad point about it is that it is an unnecessary restraint, and since there's no well-developed law, it can be brought out at any time to inflict any manner of arbitrary kind of imposition upon the media. And the good point, of course, is that it's rarely used, and it's so vague that it's impossible to actually invoke it. And yet in 2009, when the Times of India reported a border incident with China in which 2 Indian guards were supposedly injured, the Indian Foreign Secretary at that time, who was the head of our diplomatic service, threatened legal action on the grounds of this particular provision of law. The threat was not carried through, but while it held the field, it drew attention to the manner in which the media narrative in India's relations with China often serves opaque agendas beyond the control of the main actors. There was an ironic reversal of this constitutional mandate of promoting friendly relations with foreign states, and this is by way of an aside, it's an amusing aside. When last year a movie actor from Karnataka had a criminal complaint of sedition filed against her for suggesting after a visit to Pakistan that the people there are very much like us, welcoming and hospitable. meaning they don't have horns growing out of their heads. So that was considered very offensive, and there was a sedition charge filed against her. Fortunately, again, it was not acted upon. But it seemed, while it held the field again, like a political diktat to create a new category of offense, make it almost like an obligation of citizenship to promote enmity with another state. Public understanding of India's relations with China suffers from an information deficit. The official narrative is yet to be assembled, even as economic relations between India and China flourish. Media reporting has tended to lag the growth of economic ties and remain, for most part, embedded within the older adversarial framework that dominates political relations. Now, yes, this morning session, you had that presentation from Professor Alka Acharya, where she spoke about the sampling of newspaper coverage, which shows predominance of adversarial content. And the issue of opaqueness, again, in the presentations, we saw that there have been these meetings of the joint working groups between the two countries, which have been going on for 25 years, but very little is known in the public domain about what has transpired there, what is the agenda they've addressed, and what are the agreed points on which we can build in future, which is why we have this constant back and forth movement in relations between India and Pakistan. This is enhanced by a certain threat perception within India's elite circles from China's growing assertiveness on the global stage. Going back to the 1940s, when both nations were constituted in their current shape, India was regarded under Nehru's leadership as a representative of the newly emerging nations and enjoyed wide global credibility as a democratic order. China, in contrast, was isolated and locked into a confrontational mode with the world. It was an isolation that was only relieved by its tenuous relationship with the Soviet bloc, which too went into a crisis by the 1960s. Finally, the isolation was broken in the mid-1970s, and from the early 1980s, probably earlier, but early 1980s is when it becomes official policy, China has, like India, been on an accelerated course of integration with global value chains. By the early years of the century, China had emerged as a manufacturing powerhouse, the so-called workshop of the world, with an immense trade surplus, notably with the United States. That surplus was offset partly by large investment flows to other developing countries and in imports that fueled growth in several of these countries. So this is like the newly emergent China, and when you export capital, you also export political influence. That's the correlate of that new economic profile of China. India sought to fashion for itself the paradigm of being the back office of the world, a services powerhouse, though with less success. The trade account is in deficit, though the current account deficit, which also takes account of the invisible trade, is not quite so high. The reality today is that both paradigms are in crisis, and the twin crises have a common origin in the main engine of the global economy, which is the United States, slipping into a kind of economic malaise, endangering a political sulk and a mood of resentment at the rules of the global order that it has itself been the principal author of. So the rules worked so far for the US, now they're not working, so they want to change the rule book. Global rules are being rewritten. Can India and China coordinate their efforts to ensure that common interests are protected? After the last foreign secretary level contact between India and China, an expert commentator on India on strategic affairs spoke of the need for focusing on the zones of convergence rather than divergence. Can this policy of evading the really contentious issues survive for very much longer? The lesson of history is that the longer an issue is evaded, the harder it becomes to resolve. Denialism is not sound policy. What should have been a bilateral issue of settling the border with China became in time a part of Cold War calculus, that's in 1962. And then after the war with Pakistan, it became triangulated. From India's perspective, it's now a triangulated relationship because of the territory that is under dispute, which has three claimants. India has sought to deal with these difficulties by bringing in another player, and the USA. And even if the effort to wean the USA off the fatal attraction of Pakistan has been reasonably successful, it is yet to be declared an unambiguous triumph. Meanwhile, the pursuit of US patronage has involved India getting involved in disputes, like the South China Seas, where there is no possibility of a fruitful outcome. From a very quick and admittedly not very rigorous survey of 3 daily newspapers some years back, and I'm just supplementing some of the points made in Alka Acharya's presentation, and this is an older survey, but I think the trends are have persisted to this day. I found that where coverage of global news by region is concerned, the US expectedly merits top priority. Next in order of importance would be Europe and the UK, far outweighing Africa and the Arab world. The Arab world, in fact, despite the vast Indian diaspora that it plays host to, and its significance in the country's international trade relations, is unlikely to merit much attention unless it is in some ways related to the global war on terror. East and Southeast Asia cumulatively account for about half to two-thirds of the coverage that the US alone gets. A qualitative analysis of the stories reveals, firstly, a tendency to read rivalry into situations that clearly do not have any such inherent potential. Take, for instance, when our principal petroleum exploration company, ONGC, goes prospecting for oil in Africa, it's invariably posed in terms of competing with China to assure energy flows. Take again the manner in which China's outreach to Africa is represented. Times of India reported the last summit in terms that were very derivative of 19th century imperialist vocabulary. Ambitious China courts the dark continent. That was the headline. Now, the terms like dragon, dark continent, these are obviously have no place in the world, today's world, where we are looking ahead to 21st century kind of system of coexistence of nations, but they continue recurring in our media coverage. So there was this talk about how China intends to redraw the world's strategic map by forming tighter political ties with Africa, and the story was sourced from New York Times. Now, that also shows that we are, in a sense, we are a ventriloquist dummy. We are not an original source of opinion or commentary on that. We're just reproducing another perspective. Whereas we have a very different, we should at least have a very different perspective. So the arrival of social media is a big new factor that has begun to profoundly influence how the information universe is constituted. Let me just quote from two very influential figures from Google, the internet giant, Eric Schmidt and Jared Cohen, who who published their book in 2013, titled "The New Digital Age." And one of their exercises draw up a typology of how national governments like India and China are responding to the possibilities of the new information age. The Google duo saw a certain typology. In China, they saw a state that was aware of the power of the new techniques of connectivity and intent on harnessing it to sustain its own political and economic power. In India, as in China, there were worries about the unsettling of established power structures and also determination to use the internet and social media for building economic growth. With all the complexities involved, Schmidt and Cohen saw coalitions of the connected, that's the term they use, coalitions of the connected, emerging over the years ahead to influence the global discourse and the future course of politics and economics. Others, like the British diplomat Carney Ross, wrote a book titled The Leaderless Revolution. He sees as sweeping the world, transforming how political power is won, held, and exercised. Again, the new techniques of connectivity are an integral part of this new dynamic of power. User has become content. Was the future of news machine-powered or user-powered? These are all questions that Schmidt and Cohen are trying to address. As trust in the legacy media has collapsed, the internet came to be perceived as a great new hope, which would enable every user to choose just the right mix of news feeds for his needs. And as the cost for Google of producing a fresh item of news fell closer and closer to zero, consider it that Google is an aggregator. It spends nothing to produce a news item. It just pulls in stuff from somewhere and sends it out. As the cost falls closer and closer to zero, the reward from personalizing news content to a very narrow reader profile, which would offer the best target for advertising, rose proportionately. So that Google has profiled every user, and they have the exact range of interests that the advertiser would be interested in, that the user can be reached by an advertiser who's meeting these particular range of interests of him. And to sustain that profile, they will keep replicating that same pattern of news feeds. Once you give a kind of search command, now we've all had that experience that you and I can sit next to each other, Google the same term, but we'll get completely different results. Okay. I got 5 minutes. Okay. My clock says 5 minutes, but anyway, I'll wrap up soon. So without the cost, so far from creating an ecosystem in which all voices would emerge and be heard, the new web architecture is creating a silo for every user, a ghetto where the bliss of solitude and isolation is assured. Now, there's been recent experience with other social media sites like Facebook and Twitter. A notable laboratory for testing these theories is the US election. It just shows how a measure of the loss of influence of the traditional media is that there was not a single newspaper in the USA, at least not a single major newspaper, which endorsed Trump's candidacy. And yet he won because the battle of perception was fought on the social media. A large part of the stories that are circulated through Google, Twitter, and for Facebook originate in older media houses, but their impact has been diluted since stories that follow older rules of fact-checking and accuracy count for little in the new social media. Their influence is waning in comparison to the patently spurious information put in play by interested parties. An analysis of the last days of the election campaign showed that a flood of spurious stories was unleashed on social media platforms. These were in some measure traced to individuals aligned with the Trump campaign. And perhaps the more powerful mode of propagating false news came from the newly confected process of botnets, which is a combination of the robots and the networking. It combines the kind of persistence of the robot with the viral spread effect of the network. There is an analysis by Oxford Internet Institution which finds how the strategic use of Twitter was made to colonize the opposition hashtags and to multiply the hashtags of the Trump campaign. Now, Facebook has recently announced, I'll just take 2 minutes. Facebook has recently announced a new manifesto in which it has taken note of these aspects of its functioning, and it has reaffirmed its intent to perform an effective gatekeeping function. And here's what Mark Zuckerberg says. Accuracy of information is very important. We know there is misinformation and even outright hoax content on Facebook, and we take this very seriously. We've made fighting hoaxes, we've made progress fighting hoaxes the way we fight spam, but we have more work to do. We are proceeding carefully because there is not always a clear line between hoaxes, satire, and opinion. Now, there's a big dilemma in the US in terms of First Amendment interpretation. Where do you draw the line? Satire, hoax, or opinion? And it's a very libertarian interpretation of freedom of speech. And because Facebook is basically headquartered in the USA and covered by US jurisdiction, it is obliged to follow those rules. So, you can't easily say that so-and-so is hoax and take it off. You may need to make the point in court, which they clearly don't think is worth that effort. So there are several complications there. Now, let me just end by proposing that there's another model of information aggregation, which is not based entirely upon user content, but also involves a human curatorial element. And this is the Wikimedia kind of model. And the key development in the career of Wikimedia is that it was begun probably around the same time as Google. But in 2003, when Google went for its initial public offering of shares, and Sergey Brin and Larry Page, the founders, became billionaires, the founder of Wikimedia, Jimmy Wales, made the very consequential decision of registering it as a public trust. So now it functions entirely on inputs from users, but it has a very rigorous system of fact-checking, of curating the content that's posted. And this is done through a very democratic process, but it is done through an assertion of authority. So, Google has shown you one way of meeting a public function through private means. Wikimedia shows you another way of serving a public function through a public process, but with agreed set of rules within that body. Now, crowdsourcing is one of the terms that's gained a lot of popularity recently, along with post-truth society. These are two words which are often tossed around. There's a study which shows that for an ideal outcome of crowdsourcing, you need to limit the size of the crowd. Keep it at about 5,000. 5,000 is a good size of crowd. If you have 1 billion users like Facebook, then you're guaranteed to get a lot of trash coming in, and when trash gets passed from hand to hand, it floats up to the surface and becomes a dominant wisdom. So Wikimedia shows you another model of organizing information in the new social media space. And I think, if there is an intent to break out of the constraints of older media and serve a public purpose, there is a case for using that in the context of India and China. And lastly, the principles, which I won't elaborate right now, but there is an old concept called peace journalism, which is it had a bad odor to it at one time, because that seemed to suggest that the news agenda should be tailored to meet some kind of prior determined objective. But it is a more complex concept, and it involves, in fact, the restoration of best journalistic practices to the forefront. So I think I make a suggestion that the Wikimedia model of social media organization and the principles of peace journalism could, in conjunction, serve a very useful purpose in the context of India and China. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for that talk that's really laden with a lot of information and also giving us a lot of suggestions about what the actuality is, what the transition is, and offering a solution that would perhaps bring back the truth to post-truth journalism, or at least some practical way of checking and giving correct, as you call it, curatorial ownership over the media. So thank you very much, and I'm sure we'll hear more. Our next speaker is Annie Chen. Annie, were you going to show something?
Yes. She's going to have PPT.
Right. So, and can I have someone here from IT? Could you help Annie? Okay, I'm going to give you. I'll give you your bio.
Because I'm new here, actually. I joined the media industry only 1 month, so my experience is limited. So today I want to share some professional point to you. I will share something different. So if any point is incorrect, not proper, please kind of to correct me, okay? Now I will start. So today my speaking have the three part. First part is who we are. Second part is our we from the old medium to new medium. Third part is our participation for better changing. So about the first part, who we are. Actually, this is our company. Our location is in Shanghai. Our setup time is the January 2012. So this is meaning of our company, Mopo, and about our core project. So under our company, we have three parts. The first part is the Mopo magazine, and the second part is the Loop Scoop. Third part is the social matrix. About the first part, actually, I think this is a good project because if you go to Shanghai, you don't know which place you need to choose for fun, and what is the garment, where is the garment shop, and which brand clothing you need to choose to wear. This is the useful information. And the second part is right now we build a company here in Noida, Loop Scoop. And the third part, we also will build a new company here. Right now, it's under registering. For the Loop Scoop, we create some funny and interesting original content. And the third part is we create some Facebook, humor, beauty, some account. This is our magazine, some picture. We have the papers magazine and online in our website also. But right now, I'm sorry to tell, this is already failed. So about the Loop Scoop, Or what's the meaning of the loop? Loop means the love of the people, means we want to share the love and happiness with our users, Indian users. Loop also, mascot, means we want to create a platform for fun and humorous style. And this is our loop design. So for our loop scoop, right now, because we only here 3 months, it's very short here. So we only have 6 parts in our loop scoop. This is our video. End of the November, the 2016, we joined here and started the loop scoop, and this is our right now standard. And some information, we have website, and in the Google Play Store we also have the app. This is our third part. Right now, I'm not know more about this part because another colleague is responsible for this part. But our official this Facebook account. This is right now this loop scoop. Okay, the second part. Are we from the old media to new media? Actually, our MACD, how to mess up a good project. The trend, our arrival of the new media era, the rise of the digital content, we made the mobile magazines. Look this picture. Before they look the papers in the subway, but right now they also they look the handset. So, this is why our magazines failed. So for our field experience, we didn't adapt to the trend from old media to change to the new media. In the digital content era, we choose to use the old media's ways to pass the information. Waste too much time. Actually, this is a good project, but we choose a wrong way. So we waste too much time. When we understand, we have missed the best development opportunities. Then time. All the platform, they have their app. Just dating people dating, they use the app. So then time, when we want to make some change, they also successful. So we don't have the chance. So right now we come here to start this 2 part. So why we will start here for this 2 part in Indian? So this is some reasons. I will give some examples. Okay, about the first part, we want to convey some interesting and funny content to the Indian. Before our editor is Chinese editors, we also share some interesting to in our on our this website. But we think this is funny. But because sometimes the culture is different between the China and India, they think this is not funny. So that's why we start our company here, and we recruited some Indian editors to do some things. So about the first part, why we say like this? Because I will give some resource to our Indian editors. Then they will choose and create some interesting things. And I also cooperate with some China new media. If they think our content is very interesting, they also share the Indian interesting content to the China. So this is exchange the culture. Second part, Why we come here is because the India is a populous country with the digital content area is gradually major. They will require a large amount of the content. You don't ask me why I say like this because before I work, I'm the Maharashtra Vivo brand manager, so I know the handset, smartphone, the sales data. So I think this will be a trend. Means they use new ways to get the information and everything. So I think this is a large amount of the content be quite required in the future, and. We also would like to provide high quality original content to the Indian public. This is also good for our development. We think this is a chance. And the third part, the Indian is the transitional stage from the traditional content to the digital content. The team who can create high quality content are not a lot. About this point, why? Because I also look some information. They also just means pass by the information. How to? I means if for me, I will look information. I more care about some means can call my inner feelings. So, what our style? Just to give two examples, our article. Just like latest, the Justin Bieber's, his concerned ticket is very expensive. About this topic become the trending. So what we will write, our article, our style, we won't write the Justin Bieber's. We write the Coldplay. Means we share some fresh content. Because why? Because ever the Coldplay, his concert ticket is higher than the Justin Bieber's. So we will choose some different thinking and different point to share some fresh content to our users. About our title and training means every day we will check the training. Then we will write some articles, use the keywords. It will have more chance for us to be searched by the search engine in Google. And second, we are part is to attractive title. I give two examples. We are editor give two title. One title is okay. Right now you can eat your spoons after you finishing your meals. It's interesting, right? And the second part is don't need to take your luggage. Right now your luggage can follow you by itself. Maybe you will interesting about it. What's the content? What's this? You will want to know about this. Okay. So this part, okay. Okay, the third part, our participation for a better change. So why we said our participation is for a better change? Because the first part, we don't follow the normal media companies' way. They focus on spending some money to promote the website and app at the beginning. But first thing, we focus on outputting original high quality content to our users. Then we use the content to attract our users. So our starting point and our position determines our participation is for a better change. Second part means we find some good editors. Our full-time editors, they before work for some professional and big medium company in India. And our part-time editor, some of them is from the Witfeed, BuzzFeed, and the other famous media. So their ability lay the foundation for our high quality content. This is some part for our participating for a better changing. Actually, we start a company here is a very good example that our participation for a better changer means when I guide my Indian editor to create some content, I will use some Chinese styles, means our model, everything. Also, they also teach me some Indian they are content models, everything. So this part. This is right now we are project. The first loop scoop and the social matrix, we create high quality content to attract users. The second part, because more people they use the Facebook more, so the second part, the social matrix, they will bring some users for our website. The third part, we need the cooperate with the other high quality media company to share each other. We attract more users. The next part, we work together to provide the best quality content to the users, then make better changes. And the last part, we are here only 4 months. Experience is limited. We hope we have the opportunity to learn with you. And we also have hope we can cooperate with each other and discuss more. Thank you. Finish.
Okay, Annie, thank you very much for showing us how LoopScoop was created, and also what are the internal mechanisms that are using messaging and technology developed in China to really go have an attractive Indian audience. And I can tell from what your subject content is, Justin Bieber and other stars, that you are probably aiming for a youth audience in this one. So thank you very much. Okay, our next speaker here is Kishore Bhattarji. And he is a former editor, resident editor for NDTV, also the senior chair of the Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis. He has had a number of independent reporting assignments in Northeast India and also in the Maoist category, the Maoist corridor. Kish has received a couple of very prestigious awards, including the Ramnath Gonka Award for his coverage of internally displaced people, the Panos Fellowship for HIV/AIDS coverage, and an Edward R. Murrow Fellowship for journalism. He's been a speaker at many distinguished universities throughout the world, and he is also an author as well as a reporter and a writer. For his speaking topic, his topic will be to examine how issues in Asia are portrayed in regional and Western media, as well as the potential role of media, new media, in promoting regional understanding in what he has referred to as a new world.
Thanks so much. How much time do I have? Oh, that's about.
You want 10?
Yeah, I think I'd finish before that. Thanks so much. But with a little bit of antiquity, what Kathleen was saying, that the areas that I covered was India's northeast and the Maoist corridor. Now, interestingly, India and China is, so I cover, for several years, I actually covered from one Chinese border in Arunachal Pradesh to the other Chinese border in Sikkim. And the Maoist corridor that takes its name from Chairman Mao, that probably people in China don't know that there's an area, vast swath of India and eastern and central India is actually named after him. And it's considered to be India's gravest internal security threat. Something that started in 1967 from a small little tea garden in eastern Indian state of West Bengal, and it was a tea garden called Naxalbari, which is borders Nepal, and there was a little uprising that happened of farmers, let's say, and it's not something that people would have either noticed. Even today in India, people wouldn't have noticed 14 people being killed in police firing, But that one incident triggered so much of interest in Delhi that there was a cabinet mission, and actually the entire government machinery took that up very seriously, and seeing that there was a Chinese hand in it and the Chinese threat, and that continues. And that perception of India and having China, India's perception of China's hand in fueling internal instability in India continues, is the perception of the last half century. And I think that's very important for us to understand. I mean, let's be real, because the real news is actually the news that India, I don't know how China perceives India, but India's perception of China, or the government's perception of China, and the representation that we've had in Indian media is like what Mani in the morning said, adversarial. Though I have covered, like I said, from one Chinese border to the other Chinese border, my only reference or only mention of China in those reports has either been with the river Brahmaputra, which finds its source in China, is one of the largest rivers in the world, and has been a source of constant threat that India again perceives that China can control basically that part of India through blocking the river. And apparently the China has already built a reservoir out there, and there are satellite images to show that. Now that is one story that annually once that story is basically covered by Indian media about how China can actually flood us by blocking the river, and they've already created a reservoir. Just 2 days back, the story, fortunately it wasn't on the first page, it was on the third page, so we've just moved there, is that China has opened the second biggest terminal of Tibet along the borders of India, which will allow 750,000 passengers annually and 3,000 tons of cargo to be moved in. Now, the response to that, the Indian media would be that, yes, India has got 4 Sukhoi aircrafts parked in Tezpur, in the northeastern part, so that if China takes off from there, then we can, now these are not official versions. Nobody is telling the media that India is going to fly Sukhois to, bomb some airport or some railway lines. But this is the general narrative which we have been fed, and which probably we kind of perpetuate, and has been perpetuated for the last half a century. So, like I said, that the only reference that I found in, of course, Brahmaputra, and of course the 1962 Chinese invasion, as we mentioned from time to time, because every time you drive up the road to Tawang, which hasn't changed much since 1962, and those are the stories that you see, because you still see the bunkers as you move up. Now those bunkers are, of course, reminder, and it's for a television journalist, those are occasions where you actually get into the bunker and do a little photo opportunity, and you do a little piece to cameras from those bunkers, saying that this is where India fought the war, which China actually didn't even fight. I mean, it was just unilateral. China walked in and walked out. And the other story that has some also kind of made it to the Indian media off and on is about the story of the stapled visa that people from Arunachal Pradesh are issued by the Chinese government when they visit China and India, how India has had reservations about it. But these are all, one-time stories. These are just, very occasional stories. So in 2009, for example, the Dalai Lama visited Tawang, and that was after, his great escape. The entire international media was there. And then again, we did the regular, we went up the entire area, and we wanted to do a story of how he escaped. And there's a little romanticism about how he escaped. The people who kind of traveled with him on a jeep, down the road to Assam, we go to those people, tell us stories of what had happened. So it's beyond that, there is nothing. Beyond that, the other 2 days of the year where China and India actually meet, and what we talk about, the relation, is 15th of August and 2nd of October. I've done that several times of my life. 15th of August because it's the Indian Independence Day, so we invite the Chinese people, actually the army and the media to come into India. I don't remember meeting any media person, but the army, they do come in. And 2nd of October, it is of course the Chinese, what is it? The National Day. Yeah, when we go across there. So we go up to the Bumla Pass, and then they come in and we go across there. And there are cultural shows of dance and festivities, and we eat, we exchange food. And the only bonhomie that I have seen, or the only time that we actually even kind of communicate with each other, not so much in terms of language, but in, with gestures, is we exchange cigarettes. So the Chinese army people seem to be loving Indian cigarettes. That is the only time that I've seen that there was any kind of communication that India and Chinese authorities or media or have had in my tenure or whatever I've covered. Now, the other story, I'm putting these in place so that we know exactly what we are talking about. When we talk about relations, but we also need to understand the road traveled. So that to be able to understand where we are going from here, we can't be blindfolded, because a lot of young people out here would not be aware of these kind of dynamics that happen. Also, what happened was that India has always alleged that China has been responsible for fueling insurrections and guerrilla warfare in India. Not just the Maoist area, but also all the insurgent groups in India's northeast, which actually accounts for more than 50 groups, armed groups. We know for a fact that the arms come from China. We know for a fact that Muiva and others in the 60s did get trained in China. Those are photographic evidences, so there's not and these are memoirs and people. But there is no evidence whatsoever that the Chinese government did it. In the sense that, there could be areas in China where they went and they were trained, or the arms could have come from arms industries. But each bilateral talks that India has had with China, India has produced list of arms, list of people involved in those. And Sham Saran, I remember telling me, who was the national security advisor, saying that each time they exchange these notes, the conversation, which Mani again, the communication, let's say, which Mani mentioned, was very cordial, was very nice, because the Chinese authorities would simply smile. So that would neither indicate that it is true nor deny it. But it was, like he said, that there was a status quo. It never went into a really ugly situation of confrontation. It was about, Indian authorities presenting a case, the Chinese authorities neither accepting nor denying. That has been the history of whatever we've had in the past 50 years with China. There have been several other things, but these are the little things that I'm talking that media would have picked up. They refer to when they refer to, the historical processes of China. Now, the longest time, of course, I've spent on the Chinese border was when the Nathula Pass was reopened. And, I was there for about 5 hours. It was not supposed to be more than 1 hour there, because, you have rarefied air. It was raining, I remember. Again, it was a great photo opportunity. It was great because we were doing live television for the first time at 18,000 feet. And all that was really nice. But again, there was no exchange whatsoever. We did not even exchange business cards, because every single person was almost guarded. They felt guarded that, if we are talking, are we under surveillance? Are we? Of course, the Indian side, of course, is a bit of a, the circus goes on wherever we do everything. But the Chinese side, I've noticed on those two, on 15th August, 2nd of October, and Nathula uprising, has been extremely guarded. And that is something that we have not either been curious or even tried to understand
why that is there. But this is my experience that I'm talking about. But and also the other little bits of history that we talk about with China is, of course, what was mentioned in the morning, the Stilwell Road. Again, romantic, nostalgic, not something that is going to really open up any relations between India and China. Stilwell Road was a road made by Joseph Stilwell during the Second World War, really to bypass Burma and to create a supply line between that area.
It's not something that can be opened up and trade be started. Even with Nathula, it's more tokenism. It's very symbolic. There cannot be any trade. In fact, the 21 items of one of the 21 items that will be traded or are being traded between India and China, and you'd be surprised to know one of the items is rabbit's tail. So it's like the ancient, the trading items that we did, in medieval times. We're still stuck with that. So we've not really moved beyond symbolism as such. There hasn't been, which Mani mentioned was very right, there hasn't been a shot fired on either border after 62. So, the border is quiet, though the border is not demarcated. The tensions along the border is more a perception in Delhi. Out there is no border, so there is obviously no tension along the border. I've got 2 more minutes. Wow, I've kind of... I managed. I thought I'm going to run out in 7 minutes. Yeah, I'll finish up in 2. And, but, while I'm while I've given you this history, what I want to leave with is the question is that what are we even talking about? Is India-China media relations necessary? Is China-India media relations possible? To my mind, I don't think so it's possible at this point of time, because given the dynamics of the media across the world and in India, media is going through its worst crisis since the Second World War. It does not have a revenue model. It does not have a structure. 95% of India is not covered. So I don't see any Indian organization or network, spending money or having the resource to really cover China. China is far away. We don't even cover Burma. I mean, Aung San Suu Kyi, when she came to power, or when democracy happened, that was 50 years, later. That was the most momentous, reason for India to cover. No Indian media covered that. Bangladesh is not covered unless there is, the blogger's death or the Dhaka attack. Bhutan is not covered because they are very happy. And Nepal is covered only when there's an earthquake. So, my argument is that, every time we've covered South Asia and Southeast Asia, we've covered either from the Western perspective or from the point of disaster and crisis. So the point at which we need to at least start, understanding China, forget China, even understanding covering media of South Asia and Southeast Asia and ourselves, is to stop looking at it only from the point of crisis and disaster. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for giving us your rich experience and also pointing out where some of the false, let's say, implications come in, that many of the details of an event have not been really covered by the government or been maintained by authoritative sources. The other point is, of course, those areas that are missing from the news. And I think that will probably bring up some really good discussion afterward. Is there any way that new media can really cover those lacunae in the area of what is missing in the news? So thank you very much. Okay, our next speaker is Hemant Adlaka. Okay, I hope I didn't excuse me for, thank you. All right, and Dr. Hemant is with the Center for Chinese and Southeast Asian Studies at JNU. He is also the chairperson for this center, and he has a PhD in Chinese studies. His dissertation was Modernization in the State of Contemporary China, Search for Distant Civil Society. So these are all issues that will certainly be pertinent in his talk. His talk is titled India and China, Distant, with an emphasis on distant. Is it distant? Neighbors. Can the new media be different from the traditional media?
Thank you, Professor Kathleen Modorowski. And also, while I thank the organizers for inviting me to participate in this very interesting deliberations. I wish to also make a correction. I forgot to send my updated CV. I'm not the chairperson now. I completed my chairpersonship couple of months ago. So I'm sorry for that. And after listening to some of the presentations in the first session and some of the presentation by my predecessors, I think I'm tempted to now depart away from what I had come prepared with, and maybe I'll combine some immediate thoughts and observations on the basis of what I have heard today, and also what I had prepared for the presentation. But before that, I would like to take off with the very title of the today's deliberations, especially that part where it says that India-China or China-India media relations, better representation. Not that I disagree with it, but going by my own experience of observing India, China, and India on China and China on India for the last 3-4 decades, I think I'm compelled, if allowed or if given a choice, to reorder the words in better relations, better representation, and instead prefer it to call better representations and better relations, because I think in the past, as most Indian presenters have pointed out, and my immediate predecessor, who concluded on this note of not very optimistic about is India-China media relations possible or is it necessary, etc. I think I derive two things from this title, which is presented to us: better relations, better representations. One is that, it seems to be saying that enough is enough, and if India and China have not succeeded in the last whatever number of decades you call it, 4, 5, or 6, since they started having relations with each other in the modern times, I'm referring to 47, 49 period last century. If we have not succeeded much, then it is time that we move away for something newer or something more result oriented. And second, the title implies to me is that if only the two countries can achieve a better relationship, only then the media or the new media will be able to present each other in a sincere and objective manner. But how is that going to happen? Going by the past experience, I recall when we teach our undergraduate students in JNU about China, we also teach Chinese. So there is a story, a Chinese mythological tale, which is about from ancient times, and which is about, roughly translated, it titles "Moving in the Wrong Direction." That is the title of that story. And the story goes that a rich man, very wealthy man, he is traveling to somewhere, and he seems to be realizing that he's lost his way. So he stops at one place, and he finds somebody on the road and asks the person that, is this road leading to that place? And the person replies that, no sir, you are going in the wrong direction, and I'm afraid you will not reach your destination if you keep going in this direction. Then the rich man replies and says, oh, come on, I have a lot of money, my horses are the best, my driver is the best, how can you say that I will not reach my destination? And he keeps going. So whether we shift from traditional media to new media, the question is, how are we going to achieve our goal? So what I present before you today, I've never had working experience in the media or with the media. I basically teach Chinese and China, and I definitely have been observing what is reported in both countries' media about each other. So my presentation is basically a combination of my observations and comments, and also some thoughts which came to me just while I was listening today to some of the presentations. And so I've divided basically into three parts: Chinese media, Indian media, and the new media or digital media uh, as it is unfolding or in the future. China, of course, I mean, everybody knows. I need not repeat that or highlight again that the PRC government or the CPC regime maintains a tight control on both traditional media and the new media. In fact, when it comes to digital surveillance, I don't think anybody would disagree that Chinese have perfected the art, and the state in China relies upon all kinds of measures to maintain strict control. I mean, they use great firewalls, and they keep closing down publications or websites, etc., etc. That keeps going on. And all these, I mean, I'm just referring to these things to bring that into a context. What I'm trying to say is that what is interesting is that China does not shy about saying that openly, that yes, they do maintain tight controls. And I mean, take for example the president's statement recently. President Xi Jinping had said that about the media and especially the new media, and he had said that all the work by the media, Chinese media, must reflect the party's will, safeguard the party's authority, and safeguard the party's unity. So, I mean, they're very clear. So, what I'm trying to say is that despite, as some presenters today had pointed out, even I remember Shastri Ramachandran had mentioned that he was asked by many Indian friends that whether there is journalism or whether you can freely go here and there in China, etc. So, what I'm trying to say is that, of course, these restrictions are there. Of course, these tight controls are there. But at the same time, if you want to really find out, there is enough material available and freely accessible I mean, anyone who is sitting in Delhi or anywhere, through internet, you can access these opinions, these debates, this discussion, this discourse in China, which is wide ranging and which covers every topic. I mean, you can find a lot of interesting debate, even differences with the official positions and the official party line, whether it is economic policy, whether it is foreign policy, whether it is something to do with social governance, etc., etc. The point is, do we know that, number one, these things exist? And how do we know these things exist? For that, you have to know Chinese language. And that is what my fundamental point today is, that from the Indian media point of view, I mean, I was just asking Tilak, because he's recently been to China for some more than a year or to stayed there, that somebody had mentioned, Shastri Ramachandran, I think, had mentioned that what one used to know or do not know 30, 40 years ago about what is happening in China, the situation hasn't changed much today. So my point is that let us take it head on. Why the situation hasn't changed much today in 3-4 decades? And one of the reasons is that, I mean, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, anyone, all the Indian correspondents of the print media or even the visual media who are there in China covering for the Indian media, I don't think anybody speaks Chinese, or I don't think anybody is China hand. So what do you report then? I don't see any breaking news coming from either on China's economic front or political front or social front from any of our Indian correspondents. It always comes from other sources. So what do we report? We report either that what we want to report, and that's what perhaps every journalist does. I don't know. I'm not questioning anybody how they do their work, but I mean, this is one fundamental point, and the story doesn't end there. In fact, I mean, if you come to academia, Or if you come to, I mean, if you watch Indian television channels where there is almost every other day there is a panel discussion on China, and most of the panelists, they also don't know Chinese. I mean, barring few ex-diplomats or ex-intelligence or security agencies officials, nobody knows. So my fundamental point is that where do you get your information? And I mean, for example, everybody knows that decision making or policy decision making is a process. Whether it is China's foreign policy, whether it is China's India policy, it's a process. And if we know some Chinese who tell us what they are thinking or what they are writing about India in English, that is only a filtered opinion. We have no access to the process through which that opinion comes out. So, and that situation hasn't changed and doesn't seem to be changing. So it doesn't matter whether it is this media or that media. And of course, I'm referring to the mainstream media. I'm not talking about wires or other social media channels. I mean, that's one. So, I mean, to say that China is a authoritarian state, China is a country where everything is tightly controlled by the state, does that mean that we don't even try to explore? Is there anything beyond that? I think there is. I mean, I can give you any number of references. Where, I mean, I'll give you one example of North Korea, for example. If you look at the Chinese debates, I mean, there is a debate in China. Let me first emphasize on that. There are think tanks who matter a lot, and the state or even the authoritarian government is sensitive to what public thinks, what people thinks, what think tanks say. I'll just give you one example of North Korea. I mean, the amount of literature, the amount of discourse available on North Korea as a very controversial issue in China, that beats any other foreign policy issue, including Trump. I mean, in the last 2 months, the number of articles written by intellectuals or ex-diplomats or think tank thinkers far exceeds the number of articles which have appeared on Trump related to North Korea. And there seems to be a vertical split in Chinese discourse on how to deal with the situation being created in the Korean Peninsula by North Korea. And then therefore, but since we don't have much access to this, so we go by what comes in our print media or our media forums, either through non-Chinese sources, and then therefore we also have an opinion that, you know, it's all a fake. I mean, North Korea, if China wants, China tomorrow can solve the problem in North Korea. That is the impression we have, which is not true, because the Chinese actually themselves don't know what to do with North Korea. And so now, and when we come to India, for example, the Indian media, people have pointed out, I need not repeat that, about the jingoism, etc., and 62, how it matters. I mean, we look at China, everything related to China from the prism of 1962. But the funny thing is, I doubt if anybody even knows in India. My predecessor just mentioned that we call it the 1962 Chinese invasion. I doubt if anybody knows what Chinese call it, what happened in 1962. So how are we going to understand what Chinese discourse is on 1962? And so, I mean, the less said, the better on that, on the Indian media front. And I mean, going back to my topic of today's presentation also, the new media. Will new media change the traditional media in this reporting on China or looking at China? I mean, I doubt. I doubt not because of any other reason, but because the digital media or the Internet of Things, the way it is increasingly being completely controlled and dominated by monopoly capitalism and advertisement. I mean, more popular term now to describe digital media actually is now becoming clickbait. And if that is happening, And I don't know where is the scope for actually being either realistic or objective about any reporting, whether it is on China or for that matter any other topic. There is not much time, so I don't want to go into that. But I definitely, in China, even if we agree that the state control is so tight that there is no scope, on the one hand, okay, we have state censorship. On the other hand, we have the market censorship then. And to me, I think there are still ways you can find to say your things by skirting or by fooling the state censorship, but it's very difficult to fool the market censorship. It's impossible. And do I wind up or okay? And so these were some of the points which I thought I would share with you all. And lastly, digital media or social media or housed in countries like India, where or non-authoritarian or non-single party states, where there is a very perfect network between the market and the state. Otherwise, I don't know. Somebody please explain to me, why is it that since 2014 in India, the Indian mainstream media or Indian mainstream English national media, including the online versions of this media, this thing, has sharply increased anti-China and anti-Xi Jinping stance in their reporting? Any particular reason? There is a book by somebody very recently who gives 4 reasons for there is a book by George Packer, Why the Press is Less Free Today, and who gives 4 reasons, especially referring to the digital media. And the first reason he gives, he uses a term called democratators. That is, dictators in a democracy. And he uses, gives examples also of Putin and Erdogan and Trump and also Modi. And they create. He explains. I don't want to go into much explanation. And the second reason he gives is terrorism, about why the press is less free today. And third reason is the critical reporting by the local reporters. That means more and more reporting actually is done by, especially for the online media, by the local reporters. And they are facing all kinds of dangers to their life while reporting from unfriendly or difficult situations, etc. And the fourth reason he gives is digital surveillance. He does not mention anywhere authoritarian state or single party state, etc., etc. So to finally conclude, I just want to pose a question here, that if Indian mass media, let's say, if Indian mass media was state controlled, would that look, or they look any different when it came to editorial writing or reporting on China than what it is today? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing in some of those very interesting points. I'm going to digress 1 minute when you talk about language. It made me think when you were talking about the language in which reporting is done. I was doing a study in one neighborhood in Brooklyn about female trafficking, human trafficking. And I went to the police station, and I was working with a Russian speaker. And I said, well, this police station was in Brighton Beach, which is the largest Russian area and the hub of trafficking in the New York area. So I said, and I'd like to speak with someone about trafficking in this area. And they said, oh, we haven't had it here in years. And I said, well, Do you have any Russian speakers who are working here? You know, out of a force of about 25 people, no one spoke Russian. And right outside the door were these very blatant advertisements for child prostitutes and women, all written in Russian. So a tragic situation, but one that really underlines the fact that if you don't have people sensitive to the culture and sensitive to the language, how are you going to have an interpretation of what's going on? Okay, well, we're going to move on to our next speaker, and that is Mr. Tilak Jha, who is a fellow at the Bai-Jan Asia Institute, and this is part of Zhejiang University in Hangzhou, China. He is teaching currently at Amity University, and he completed his studies at JNU. So his title is going to be talking about alternative ways of learning about a place, and also media forms that are much more personalized. Those personalized forms of media, what can they tell us, and how can they create a rapprochement in the different societies, the different cultures?